Here we are, bottom of the Smash Mountain. I would like to thank my supporters over at patreon.com/bsmpod for continuing to support me and what I'm doing. Done this intro a bunch of times, but it doesn't matter. I'll still trip over it. It's all good. I'm also happy for all the listeners and viewers for joining us for today's episode, in which we're going to be talking to Frost, the firmware developer of the Phob controller. So this is one of the new wave things in the Melee community, and I'm really excited to learn more about this controller. Frost is obviously a great choice for that, but also very willing to come on, which I very much appreciate. And so, Frost, how you doing?
How are you, Cypher? Everything on my side is good. Just here and ready to get ready into this interview.
Very good. Would you say this is your first time that someone has said what you're doing is so cool that I want to interview for about an hour or so, and as compared to like a quote or maybe perhaps an online website kind of a deal? Have you done this before?
I have not done this before, so this is really cool to me.
I'm glad to hear that, because I get to say the first interview for Frost. That's cool. I think you should definitely, and Phobos as well, shout out. So I was just learning before we started officially recording here that is the person who originally came up with this concept, and I'd love to get into that in just a second. But with the Phob controller being as popular as it already is, just being a new alternative way to use a GCC controller, I'm referring to a GameCube controller when I say that, by the way. But this is one of those new wave things. Melee community loves hearing about this kind of stuff in detail, and a very nice active Discord for the Phob controller enthusiasts. Shout outs to Hoborg. I did not know where Hoborg lives. Hoborg lives in the Phob controller Discord. That's where you can find him. But Hoborg is a friend of the program, so it's cool to see, and is also trying to like build a few of these himself. So it's really cool to see Phob kind of making a name out there as a new controller method. I'm just interested to hear from you about how you get involved in all of that. But I guess, do you want to talk about a little bit how you got into Melee first, or do you want to skip that and go straight to the controller?
We can start with a few of the introductory questions first on how I got into Melee.
Very good. So, did you grow up with the game? Did you have siblings that would play? That was how it sort of was for me.
I did not. I am Generation Z Zoomer, so I did not grow up with Melee. I grew up with Brawl. I got into Melee from one of the documentaries, There Will Never Ever Be Another Player Like Hungrybox from Implement.
Yes.
I watched that during the pandemic, and then that got me into the game a few months down the line. I'm very thankful for Slippy that gave me the opportunity to join in at this time, and that's where the ball got rolling. A few months later, I got really, really interested in controllers, and more specifically, the digital controllers, the rectangles, because I play Ice Climbers, and there is a set of inputs that the Ice Climbers can do on a digital controller that are nearly impossible on a standard analog stick GameCube controller. These are known as the sensitivity desyncs, where they're value-perfect coordinates where the ICs do weird jank. You know, this can be one does a smash attack, or one does one aerial, one does another aerial. And around November of last year is when I finally got into it, and I actually ended up building my own DIY box to experiment with that. And that's what really got my feet into the whole controller space.
Oh, that's cool to hear that there's a lot of different ways to go when you join into Melee. You can be a competitor, you can be a content creator like myself, if you want to call me that, but you get it. And then you have the stream monsters, the people who also like Melee stats, who just love categorizing things within Melee and ranks and everything else like that. There's so many different ways to enjoy the game, but one of my favorite videos about Melee is by Seth Loves to Talk, who did a video about artwork of controllers. As far as I remember, I don't even think that he was able to get so much into like the modification of GCCs, so much as how artwork has really started to take off for how people like to see what their controllers are in their hands and doing all kinds of like light up stuff, this, that, and the third. It's a really fun video. I wanted to ask you about the Lemon documentary for just a second, because I've heard this a few times now. There's sort of like the Lemon kids, if you will. People who watch that video about Hungrybox and go, okay, this is cool. I'll give this a shot. I'm just wondering what was about it that sort of sold you, because did it just come up on your timeline? You get 5 minutes in and you go, well, I guess I'm watching the rest of this video now, because when you first watch it, it's like, oh, I don't want to sit through something like this for an hour and 30 minutes. It's about a video game. Who cares?
I was following Implemen for a little bit of time at that point because I was really curious some of his he's a YTP creator, so I was
Yes.
following him for primarily that. And then that video came up and I said this is a long form content and I'm not sure I'm going to like it, so I sat down for the first 5 minutes. And 5 minutes in you get into the Hungrybox crab story, and once that was told, I was hooked right in. And what eventually got me to really be interested in Melee is the storylines of the five gods, and how effectively over time we saw that era fall. And then what really caught my eye at first was the what Implement called the 20XX Foxes in the 2013 to 2015 era, where players focused on getting more technical and more precise. That's where I got my start. I was a Fox player. I wanted to really, push a lot of buttons and be aggressive and fast. And once I actually got into the game, once I started entering a few online tournaments, I realized that no, this is not the style for me, and I immediately switched 6 months later to Ice Climbers.
I think there's a certain way where if you decide fast and aggressive and going in all the time is not for me, then you sort of naturally say, floaty, a floaty character might actually be the move for me. When I try to play as Falco, who I feel like is my favorite character to play as in Melee, then I play against another person who plays Falco or Fox properly, or even as Captain Falcon, I play a heavier, faster character, and I'm just I can't move. But if I play as a floaty, just by nature, I go, oh, I have room to think now because I'm so bad in Melee that I just need time to think about what exactly I'm going to do. Whereas the people who've been playing for years and years and years, the people who've been playing since 2010, they just do it like they're basically just brushing their teeth, except over the course of 5 or 10 minutes, completely destroying you in a set, whatever it happens to be. But if I play as a floaty, it's like, oh, well, I have more time to think. Is that sort of what was happening with you? Or did you just feel like, oh, fast and aggressive isn't literally my style. I prefer another part of Melee that's more appealing than just running in all the time?
Um, Fast and aggressive wasn't for me, but I also did still want to play a character that could be aggressive. I just didn't want to be fast. I wanted a character that could apply a lot of pressure and that could apply a lot of threat in this very small space. So the Ice Climbers and the punishing grab game fit that mold perfectly. I actually watched a friend of mine, Durf Midwest, absolutely destroy a university in a crew battle. He sweeped all 16 of their stocks in a 4 versus 4 man crew battle with Ice Climbers. And once I saw that, I was like, this character can really do stuff. I pulled it out in friendlies a couple of times, and I fell in love with the character. The ability to just have that little space in front of you that you threaten with absolute death
Yes.
is just so appealing because you can use that as a form of aggression and neutral that really drew me to the character.
And since we're talking about the Hungrybox documentary a little bit here, that's sort of the idea with Jigglypuff as well, where you have to look for your openings, and once you can get them and convert on them, you are the most dangerous player in the room or at a tournament. Because Hungrybox won so many tournaments, letting other people sort of play into his style, play into his traps that he sets, the mind games that he does, all that fun stuff. And I love even still like watching that documentary just helps to enforce storylines for me and helps to remind me about a lot of historical things. There are obviously things that have happened a long time ago. Pound 2019 was more than 3 years ago now, which is crazy to think. It's been 3 years since the crab, but I'm thinking nowadays the storylines that we have are a little bit harder to explain to somebody who's new to the game because you can't lead with, oh, well, there's 5 really good players. They're called the 5 gods and everybody's trying to beat them and they're trying to beat each other. They can all challenge each other for best player in the world. How would you describe Melee to a new person if I were in an elevator with you and for some reason you got to the part where actually no, I'm not here to play the new Smash game, I'm actually here to play the old one? Like, how would you describe it to me?
I'm going to take a moment to think on that. Hmm. The way I would explain Melee to a new viewer at this point, with an emphasis on its storylines, is It's a game that It's a game that rewards fast-paced movement and precision with your punishes and combos. And the overall idea is that anyone can beat anyone. Amongst the best of the best players, amongst the most talented, there is no one here that is completely dominant. Anyone can be dethroned, anyone can lose, anyone on the day can just slip up and be upset. And I think that would be very, very appealing um, because while people do like to follow villains, a field where absolutely anything can come from is also incredibly intriguing in its own.
Yeah, I think that having Zane be the person who's trying so hard to get to the dominant player status, to be someone who is going to be remembered as a top 10 all-time player or top 5 all-time player, you need to have long periods of dominance. You don't win 2 tournaments in a row, you win 10 tournaments in a row. Like that kind of stuff, that kind of dominance, Zane's trying to get there. And I love the idea that even if he's trying to get there, he's continually foiled by yet another challenger. And that's the part where I get into the whole anybody can win piece, because the other fun storyline recently has been seeing Mook, who played for such a long time, just didn't get an opportunity like Genesis and Summit most recently to show off. Yes, I was just like super cracked with Sheik. That's what Mook is apparently. So shout out to Mook.
What is it with the Sheik players? I mean, during the pandemic, we had Ben come out of and rise up to challenge Hungrybox at ECF and other online weeklies. It's the Sheik players, man.
Yeah. And I love the kind of stuff that Ben has. There was a video that he put up on Twitter recently where he said, these are just some throwaways. I was trying to get creative. And I'm like, you're trying to extend punishes and reads with the Sheik side B where whips out the chain. Oh, that's so cool. So yeah. Shout outs to Sheik players. And within months, I've gone from thinking that Sheik is a little bit harder to watch to being excited when there's a Sheik player on the screen.
Yeah, there's been a massive cultural shift surrounding the character.
Been cool to see. But meanwhile, I'm interested to hear about this DIY rectangle box style controller that you built. That was your first expedition into the controller sphere, that specific faction of the Melee community. So you're in Crane's lab, I'm assuming, and you're checking out all these DIYs and you go, well, I want to do that. Or how did it happen for you?
So the video from Crane came up on doing a cardboard box DIY.
Yes, the cheap one. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that one came up, and that one, it caught my eye saying, so you can build this controller for very, very cheap and have it work with Melee. And, box controllers have been a curiosity of mine since I picked up the game, because there's no analog inputs. It's vastly different than anything I've ever played. I've been primarily a controller player my entire life. Across all games, across all consoles, I've always had analog sticks. So just using all digital controls to me was just a curiosity. So that video came up, I looked into it, I said, I want to do this. I want to go out there and build my own. And I'm actually also very, very fortunate that I have a makerspace here at my university, because I'm a university student, that was able to assist me in fabricating everything I needed for the project.
Oh, that's cool.
They have wood laser cutters here where I use to actually cut out the face plate, the back plate, and all the side inserts. They had soldering stations where I soldered up all the buttons and tested everything right there in the makerspace.
That's super cool.
If I didn't have that, building it would have been a vastly different experience.
Oh yeah, it probably would have turned out like the controller that Crane was building, just for instance. Like we're going super low level cardboard.
But no, instead mine actually came out really, really nice with a mahogany gel stain that I put on the wood itself. I used.
Can I see this? Do you have it?
I have a photo, but
okay.
I can.
If you send me a photo, I can sneak this into the overlay. I think that's how we can do it. See, this is one of the cool things for the people who've been listening to the podcast a while. I always talk about how I can't really, do stuff like this, but with my new setup, I should be able to do that pretty easily. No big deal. No big deal. But it's really cool to hear about how you have resources at university where before you're watching the video and you go, okay, I don't have this stuff at home, but you're saying, oh, wait, but I got all kinds of cool stuff at
Yeah,
university. So that's
I
really
was
cool to hear.
it's really, really fortunate that I have this opportunity to just be able to go to a single building and have everything from laser cutters to soldering stations to all that equipment there on hand that I don't really have to pay for.
Mm.
It was a massive boon. Like even when I got started on the Phob, it was a massive boon to the project.
And when you had built that, and I'm assuming, is this the first time you're using a rectangle style controller, or did you try one at a tournament or from a friend?
I
Like,
did not.
what was the first time you actually played on a rectangle? Was it with your build?
It was the first time I played on a rectangle controller was with my build because it's something that was an idle curiosity for me, and I wanted to see what does the first question in my mind is what does wave dashing feel like on the box? What does it feel like to physically plink the keys to get a wave dash input? And then, what does it feel like to plink to get other various inputs? And the overall impact of that was consistency. The box is something that if you do the same physical motion, the game will give you the same output. And that's something that stuck out to me as very, very important. And that's something that I saw a massive contrast to GCCs. Because on GCC, it doesn't matter how great of a player you are never going to be 100% concise on that analog stick. You are never going to move it to the same place twice.
Well, you were talking earlier about how Ice Climbers, in order to get some fun little jank, you have to put it literally on a board of an analog controller stick for Melee, where there are so many spots that are registered spots on that thing.
There are 20,000 coordinates on Melee's input space.
It's insane. And you have to put it on the one. No big deal. It's like if Summoning Salt ever does a video on Melee, 20,000 coordinates, and you have to put it on this single coordinate. So naturally, all Melee players do this. No, Melee players can't do that. Oh.
No, you can get reasonably consistent assuming you have a notch for it, but never 100%.
That's so crazy. Yes, and so you're looking at the box. It's like you said, and this is something that I recently got a box as well. Shoutouts to Smokey. Shoutouts to Eternal Project. Anyway, Smokey helped me get the box style controller, the B0XX, the box. And playing that, I'm going, oh, this is nice, because I'm not super great at having exact motion for a control stick, but with buttons, I just have to get the rhythm down of when exactly to press the buttons, because that's still very important. Frame perfect timing is required for certain things, and so I have a long way to go. Such a long way to go for us, but it feels doable now. It feels doable to me.
It grants you that consistency.
Yes.
That as long as you push the buttons in the right order at the right frame timings, you will get the right output. Something that cannot normally be done on an analog stick.
But still, even despite all of that, we've gotten you here because we want to talk about the Phob controller. And so when you were playing on your build for a little while and continually getting more and more into controllers, when does the Phob controller come into your sort of like your space?
So I finished building my box in November of 2021, last year. And in January, Phobos, the lead developer of the Phob GCC and the controller's namesake, created a Reddit post, a controller survey, where he wanted to collect the community's thoughts on what controller behavior should be like. And in that Reddit post, he actually linked the GitHub for the Phob GCC. And that's where I initially got my first look at the project. And the moment I saw that Reddit post, I immediately checked Melee Online and any other Discords to see, is this guy in here somewhere? And the moment I found him, I sent him a DM. I sent him a DM saying, hey, I'm really interested in this project. And early January, I got in touch with him, and that's where it all began.
Oh, that's great. I mean, that's literally how I get people onto the podcast. I see somebody posting about the Phob launch trailer, or there's like the new firmware update. Here's sort of a video sort of breaking that all down, and I'm watching and I'm going, oh, this is addressing one of the bigger, more pivotal issues of the GCC controller, which is POD. That's something that people complain about quite a bit.
Mid-January, I finally ordered my first set of boards using Phobos's guidance, and by the end of January, I finally have a finished board, the famous one from the reveal trailer. So it took me about 20 days or so to gather all the parts and assemble it, and then I finally had my first Phob GCC at the end of January. This is a 1.0 board. This is the original prototype.
And wait, you don't actually have it within a controller right now. Is it just to show off, or did you try it at all?
It's just a show off.
Ah, gotcha. How does it feel?
My initial, the firmware, the software that actually runs the controller has vastly changed in the past couple months. It is absolutely unrecognizable. But from my first testing, back when we were running 0.15, that was the version, I can already tell this thing was consistent, which is what attracted me directly to it, because that's what I remember from the box. That as long as I did a similar enough analog input, the controller just got me most of the way there. Even if it wasn't identical, it just got me most of the way there.
Are you ready to explain to me, as the person in the room who is not intelligent on such things, and tell me what exactly is happening with this whole magnetic field stuff? And it's supposed to like, there is no POD involved because it's just not a thing. That's the best way for me to explain it, but sure. I would love to hear you break it down for me.
Actually, I am going to get one more thing from my...
There's another thing for all the people who are listening. I'm so sorry. For all the listeners who are not watching the video, you're missing out on all the FOSTs that I put into the overlay, the OG build, the first rectangle build that Frost made, and also a render of the current board of the Phob controller. So you might want to watch this episode is what I'm getting at.
So if you look on the sides of any stick box in a GameCube controller, you will see these black little things that are attached to it. Right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
These are the potentiometers. So if I unclick this, that is the potentiometer that clicks onto the stick box and measures its rotation. So on the inside of the potentiometer, it's basically a variable resistor. So what it is it's just measuring, it's just changing. It's a wiper that goes on the inside that just scrapes against some material. That's what a potentiometer basically is. It's a wiper on the inside that as you turn your stick box, it scrapes against, making a path shorter or longer. But it's scraping.
Right.
And when two things scrape together, they tend to damage each other. And as things get damaged, this is where POD comes in, where you have the potentiometers quite literally deteriorating over time as they're used.
Dude, imagine in Titanic, I'm sorry, imagine in Titanic, you know how they like scrape against the iceberg, and it's like, just imagine like somebody like putting, like, silence the movie audio, have a control stick clacking around, and the video sped up to like match the sorry, okay, go ahead, you were saying.
So potentiometers wear out due to this, because there's constantly the scraping motion every time you move the stick box, and do that 100,000 times over the course of a couple months, and it's already in pretty bad shape.
Yes.
Because the more it scrapes, the more it's likely to actually lift off the material, which causes missed inputs, missed dashbacks, missed pivots, everything.
And for the average Melee player who it can put in so many inputs a minute, it's crazy. For all the serious Melee players out there, you already know what you can do to your average controller when you're using it for tournament. Like, there are people, most of the pros, they have tournament controllers that they try really hard not to use except in tournament, because they know, I want this to be as close to something that I can expect as possible. But then there are other people who say, I don't really want to have a tournament controller, quote unquote, because I want to get used to the one that I'm using and just keep using it until eventually I can't use it anymore. And it's just every once in a while, you'll have someone like poor Axe at Low Tide City, at Low Tide City earlier this year, had a controller problem, had to switch off to a new one, and you could just tell that because it was different, and Axe is so reliable on, is relying on that consistency and not getting it, it impacted his performance. It's really unfortunate to see stuff like that happen, but it happens all the time.
Yeah. So now we talked about the issue of potentiometers. Now I'm going to get to how the Phob fixes that.
Mm-hmm.
So let me just lift the stick cap off of here. And so if you look at the stick box there, you see something. There's no
Potentiometers.
There's no black little bits attached to it. Yeah.
Right.
Instead, you have these metal things. These are the magnets.
Mm-hmm.
And below them, you can see a small little black thing lifted off the board, can't you?
Yes. Yep, I can see that.
Those are what's known as Hall effect sensors. So Hall effect sensors sense changes in magnetic field direction in order to give out a different reading. So as the stick box here turns, so if I turn this, let me just position this right, you can see the magnet turns.
Oh, the magnet turns with the stick. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So as this magnet turns, the magnetic field itself is rotating around and impacting how the sensor is reading it.
Yes, but the key thing there is that the Hall effect sensors is never touching the magnet. They are very much separated from... Okay, that's so cool.
They are two separate pieces that make no contact. And this is why there's no POD. This is why there's no degradation over time, because there's nothing to wear out. If these two things aren't touching, they're not going to wear out. And therein lies the beauty and consistency of the Phob.
Why weren't we doing this earlier? Because I've heard this has been used before. Like this is not like a super brand new, like all of a sudden Hall effect sensors are a thing and now we're using them for GCC controllers.
The Sega Dreamcast actually had Hall effect sensors on its controller. If you believe it, if you believe it or not, like
is that the like they were onto something there? Is that the inspiration for Phobos when it's like looking at the whole POD situation, being like, no, we're gonna do Dreamcast, baby?
No, but that was something that we looked at afterwards, and the big reason why is cost. You know, companies have to make money, and they have to make these things as cheaply as possible. Potentiometers in batches end up being cheaper than Hall effect sensors and figuring out how to properly mount the magnet.
Gotcha. And well, we all know how video game companies like to do. They like to do things cheap.
Money, yeah. Money. I mean, you see PlayStation 5 controllers now drifting. Yeah. So,
well, why does it feel like every single controller out there is just out to get you? And we understand for the serious gamers, you don't even have to be super casual. Like even people who play video games with the same controller a few times a week will eventually start to notice, wow, this thing really sucks, huh? Like it just doesn't take long for some of these controllers to start being problematic.
Yeah, no, it's the choice of stick box, it's the choice of potentiometers that are doomed to fail from the get-go. And the Joy-Con is a whole separate fiasco all on its own.
Yes, indeed.
I actually like had to tear down my own Joy-Cons to replace the stick boxes, and I decided to open up one of the stick boxes to see the problem, and it's pretty apparent.
What's the problem that you saw? I might have missed it. Did you say it already?
No. So the problem is that at the base of the stick box there's this graphite pad, and there are parts of the stick box that scrape against the graphite pad, and eventually the graphite pad wears away enough that it starts shifting inputs.
Oh, that
graphite pad wears out faster than any potentiometer I've seen.
Yeah, when I hear graphite, that makes me immediately think that's not sturdy at all.
Yeah.
That's just...
But this is where the strength of the Phob is in its contactless sensors.
Mm-hmm.
No contact, no wear. It's that simple. The only thing you'll eventually have to replace is the stick box when it finally caves in or stops working.
So you make your first Phob controller and you're asking all these kinds of questions to Phobos, I'm sure, but when does it eventually become that you're saying things that Phobos is going, a word? Like, okay, well, guess what, Frost? I could have you do some things.
Actually, it started around mid-February, where I start talking features, where the original user interface for the fob, or how you configure things in the controller, was relied on D-pad inputs, and I was not a really big fan of that. And anyone who's used a GameCube controller knows that that the D-pad is not good.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
What?
No kidding. Oh my gosh. Using the D-pad. Sorry. Everybody puts in bad slippy inputs for chat. Like, oh, I didn't mean to say LOL. I'm sorry. Well,
So
I did, but anyway.
The original, like for example, the original calibration commands required you to advance the calibration steps with the D-pad. And I was saying like how we should do it with the A button because it's a lot more of a consistent input.
Yep.
And that was my first suggestion. You know, I decided I'd look into the code, and then I said, "Hey, Phobos, I can do this." And then he says,
yes, that's
sure.
the important thing. A suggestion is just a suggestion, but like, you're like, I can actually do this. And Phobos was like, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. So he gave me access to the repository, and I made my first PR doing adjusting those commands. It was pretty daunting at first because I'm not a software developer. I'm not a computer science student. I'm a computer engineering student. My ballpark, my avenue is entirely different. It was a pretty daunting task at first, and working in a code base that was developed by someone else was a big leap. But I think I made a very, very good landing, and I even continued to develop on that, and I also made it so that you would be able to toggle your triggers. So, you know how triggers, you have the analog portion and you have the digital portion at the bottom. I made it so that you could disable the analog slider entirely to have only the digital press.
Right, which is really okay. Some people are going to be very interested in that because I guess for most Melee players, when you play the game long enough, like it feels like you have to like plow through snow in order to actually able to get the input that you want. Meanwhile, if you just do this, it's like, oh, this is nice. It actually, wow, it doesn't require all that force.
Nope. So you could just go straight down to the digital input, and you won't get any shield before that. This is what people usually take their springs out for. So the analog trigger, this is what they take their springs out for primarily for wave dashing and power shielding. And power shielding especially because there's what's called ADT, the analog to digital transition, where for about 2 frames or 1 frame, your character is vulnerable.
Oh, and as we know, that's just like everything.
Yeah.
That's all you need to get shined or hit by some other attack, and you're just going, why is this happening? Oh, it's because of your controller. It's out of your hands. And you go, no. Why?
So drawing from the experience I learned from my box, I wanted to bring consistency to the Phob. And those were the first 2 suggestions I had, and once Phobos saw those, he kind of like brought me on board as a full-time firmware developer, because Phobos himself wanted to focus primarily on the hardware, primarily on the board design, on the sensors, on this, on that.
Yeah, because the C-Stick was next. That's something that has since started to come in, because originally it was just for the control stick, but of course you get people coming in being like, the C-Stick? Or you go, all right, well,
yeah,
but that's not your ballpark. That would be more of a Phobos project.
Yes. So I initially started out as the firmware developer, and Phobos was handling the hardware. So I was making adjustments to the commands, trying to see how I could improve it. And then we have the entrance of probably one of the most important figures to the project, the man known as Car Vacuum, or Carvac.
Carvac?
So
go
Carvac,
wander into the Discord and look around.
Oh yeah, Carvac does signal processing for work, so he's very, very familiar with the work we were doing, and he started asking Phobos for a set of data to use to create a new filter for the controller. Now I'm going to explain in basic terms what is a filter. So a filter is basically you take an input waveform that, say, like I move my analog stick left and then I let go, and shapes that waveform into an ideal output. So if you want me to provide an image for that, I can.
Are you basically saying that, okay, I picture it as, you know how you build a habit, your brain is literally building neuron pathways, and the more you use a certain mindset, action, whatever, however you want to phrase it in your brain, the more it gets used to it, and then the neurons can fire through those pathways faster. Is this basically that concept applied to a controller?
Basically, but it's in use all over technology. Signal filtering is incredibly important to remove noise. It's especially for things like audio equipment.
Ah, see, this is something that I have no clue about. I just like go, oh look, the green go green, yellow, red.
Yeah, so if you look at the at that graph, the blue is the raw signal. That's what these sensors are giving out. And then how do you take that signal and how do you perfect it? How do you make it an idealized signal? Well, the first thing that needs to happen is you need to remove snapback, the bane of all Melee players.
Yep.
Yep. When you release the stick, it needs to be able to basically dampen itself in software. So if you look at that graph there, you can see the orange and yellow lines have much less pronounced oscillations, and that's actually where the snapback dampening is happening. So
yes, I can see that because the raw is like significantly more crazy as it goes back. But then, yes.
So the raw is the total filter, and the old filter is what the controller ran on in version 0.15, and the new filter is the filter written by Carvac. Now, if you look even closer on this, if you look on the leftmost part of the graph where it's starting to rise, you start to see that the Phob GCC is a little bit delayed, right? So you have the raw, and then you have the two filter delays.
Right, yeah, they're behind just ever so slightly.
Yeah, that's about, I think, about a quarter to about a half of a frame behind. But you see that they're quickly accelerating towards the actual stick position.
And in fact, they almost seem to get there at almost the exact same time. It's really in the middle of the input that they're separated by the mode.
Yeah, and that is actually very desirable behavior in Melee. Because, so, if you look at the analog stick map of Melee, you have the tilt zone, which, starting from the beginning, you have the dead zone where the stick effectively detects no inputs.
Yes.
Then you have the tilt zone, which is where you get your tilt inputs. And then beyond that, you have the smash zone where you can get smash attacks.
And also dash, walk, for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so walk happens in the tilt zone, dash happens in the smash zone. Where in fact, dash dancing has the name of smash turn. So you want to cross the tilt zone as quickly as possible for a lot of Melee's inputs. If you want a dash dance to feel great, you want to skip right over the walk zone and go directly to the dash zone.
Hence why the box is a desirable thing, because there is no crossing the travel time, that one of those sticky words that people like to throw around.
But now if you look at the Phob GC signal behavior, its travel time in the tilt zone is faster. It's accelerating faster to the actual stick position.
Right, which is what a lot of people want, because otherwise in the raw input you can cross into a registered tilt zone or what have you, and that's bad because it's going to make you your character do something or prevent you from doing something as fast as you want it to.
Yep. So the Carvac filter, summed up in 3 words, is rise time shortening. It shortens the time
Carvac.
It shortens the time that is spent in the undesirable tilt zone, because that tilt zone ruins everything from your dash dances to your pivots to your SDI as well. That tilt, because if you're caught in the tilt zone on the first frame of SDI, you will be locked out of SDI for like the next frame or two, I think.
And that's so important it's just so important for certain things. Okay, so do you remember in the Amp Lemon doc when it pauses on the up throw up air by Armada versus Hungrybox in EVO 2016? Is like the smallest thing matters. Yeah. Hungrybox makes that SDI, wins the tournament, or he doesn't, and he dies, and that's it.
There's a universe where his controller borked out on him, and he dies.
Yes, and I know that it's fun to. Every now and again, we get discourse around the whole idea of Hungrybox not practicing SDI or practicing SDI. Yeah. And like my version of thinking of it is he'll hit it when he needs to hit it.
that rise time shortening is so incredibly powerful, and it's what makes the fob feel so snappy and responsive. Because if you ask any player who's tried it, the first thing they're going to say is that like it feels responsive, it feels good to move. And that's because when you're dash dancing around, when you're moving from the center of the stick to the gate, the filter slows down at first and then quickly speeds up. The
And
the end point is the same, but it's the transfer from center to gate that happens very, very quickly that makes it feel better.
and so when you are getting lost in the sauce of all of this, for you, I'm just interested in hearing where you feel this project can go collectively, but also what your own input on it is going to be in terms of in a long-term way, because I'm thinking from your perspective, you fall very far down the rabbit hole of Melee, and now you're here. You're still in school, but eventually that'll lead to something else, hopefully a very well-paying career where you can pay off all of your student loans and blah blah blah. Hopefully, here's hoping. But like you're also coming from a time where you didn't grow up with the game, you just got into it because of a video, and just the welcomingness of the community hopefully was also part of the reason why you stuck around and getting to do all this cool stuff. But I feel like for me, I have no idea where you go from here, because for myself, it's always going to be a part of me. I've tried, I've occasionally in the past would go out of Melee completely because I was never really truly part of the community until the past couple of years. But for a long time, I mean, I watched videos in 2006 about Melee and competitive Melee, but I never went to a tournament until last year. So that's me. But the point is that I always got sucked back in because it's partially nostalgia, because of the storylines, because of wanting to play the game myself, all those things. But I guess nostalgia is sort of missing for you. That seems to be a really key component for a lot of people. But for you, that might not be the case. You can disagree with me, but I'm just curious about, like, does this seem like a phase of your life sort of a thing, or does it feel like, no, this will be something that I'll just, like fiddle around with for a really long time?
I think that I'll be fiddling around with the fob with controllers in general for a very, very, very long time. Because from what I've gathered in my time in the Phob Discord is that this is something the community has desperately needed for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean just a controller board replacement. I mean an open source project that everyone can contribute to. I've talked a lot about how, Phobos was the original idea guy. I'm a firmware developer. Carvac brought in a massive improvement to the filtering system. But in reality, this project is not done by 3 people. It's done by community. We've taken input from everyone. We've taken in help from everyone. So if you look on the overlay there, if you look at the 1.2 board, if you look at where the ABXY buttons are, you see those little squares around the top and the bottom of them? Those little gold squares?
Yes.
Those are actually mounting pads for mouse click face buttons.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
So that was the first hardware contribution that was made to the project. So Verge hopped into the Phob Discord, said, "Hey, I do this mod from time to time where I mount mouse click face buttons on a controller, but it's a pain to do and it's a lot of delicate soldering work. Is there any way we can engineer the Phob board to make it easier?" So Verge came in, did the measurements, and implemented it, and then Phobos accepted that hardware design. And that's where things really, really started to accelerate and started to take a very, very drastic turn. The project left the hands of strictly the developers and went directly into the community. And that's where things have really started to grow and explode. We've gotten help from Rien on controller inputs and stick behavior. We've gotten help from Plants for things like a vendor list. We've gotten help with Hunter or Wave for actually getting LR digital pads custom made. So the idea eventually is to remove the need to have a GameCube controller in order to build a Phob. So those LR pads are another step in that direction. Plants is actually now helping us source proper Z switches for mouse click Z. To say this is a 1-man or 2-man or 3-man effort would be absolutely incorrect. Even you mentioned at the start of this, Hoborg got involved. He and Karvak ordered 1.2 boards for testing validation and built them and brought them to tournament and put them in the hands of players and got test results. That's the kind of behavior that I'm really, really, really glad to see. That this isn't just a 1-man or 2-man or 3-man job. This is done by a community at this point. Where I actually haven't written a lot of code in recent time. It's more so about, how can like getting others to contribute. When someone brings in an idea, it's about saying, okay, so how can we turn this into a better design? And that's where things for the Phob have gone, where it's you take an input from the community saying, hey, we want to do X, Y, Z easier. And it says, sure, so let's talk about that. And that's where the Phob has become this nebulous thing that the community can all contribute to. Doesn't matter what controller mod you want to do, the Phob can probably accommodate it.
And so that's the challenge, right? An open source project, this is when it's operating at a very close to optimal, but I feel like there are just as many open source projects where without strong leadership and sort of a clear vision of what the goal is, things start to fall apart. And so I'm curious from your perspective, why do you think, other than, I know the obvious answer to this question, but you could say it, why this has been going really well so far?
This has been going really, really well so far because we've had very, very involved people. So beyond just the development team being incredibly involved and very talkative and very open and willing to discuss things in the Discord, you have the moderators, you have people who have been here since the very, very beginning, talking about the controller, talking about the behavior, and building more of them. So there's been a lot of community involvement that makes this work. I think a big pitfall of other open source projects is that they're held to a tightly knit team. And the Phob is gone in the opposite direction. Anyone can contribute.
And so what's the next frontier sort of idea that a lot of people, or Phobos himself, however you want to phrase it, is sort of the next thing to take on? Is it continuing to iron out all the kinks and make it so that getting a controller out there to a person who's looking for one faster, is that the next big thing? Or is there another thing where we're like, well, maybe the D-pad shouldn't suck for once. Like I think about the Panda controller and how excited I was for that to be a reality, because I thought this is sort of like the realization of so many different concepts. It's going to be what people use for hopefully not just 2 months and then scrap it, but use the same controller for 2 years, where they can continually replace parts because of how easy it is to take everything out of that Panda controller and put in new parts, and then they don't have to worry about sourcing new controllers and this, that, and the third. Then it shut down. I was like, oh, but this sounds like it's low key trying to get there, albeit slower, and you don't have like the backing of like big old company behind it, whatever. And to be fair, Panda is not big old company status, not Nintendo or anything like that. My gosh. But it's cool to hear that. I think that's part of the push towards the near future. But what would you say is sort of the next goal for the Phob controller as of now?
I think the ultimate goal of the Phob controller is to entirely replace the GCC. To entirely replace the need to, because the current way to build a Phob is you start with a GameCube controller, right? You harvest parts and you build it. A big goal for the community is to step away from harvesting and needing parts from a GameCube controller, and that's the kind of thing that's kind of driving development and driving progress into it. And alongside that, you do have the bug fixes and the smoothing out of the issues, because there have been a lot of issues and there will continue to be a lot of issues because GameCube controllers are really, really complicated.
Super complicated. Just watch the Awesome Sauce video. Like I always tell people who are casuals, I'm like, if you want to know why Melee players are so particular about their controllers, just watch the Awesome Sauce video. It's such a good video for that.
Yeah. So like for example, we have Karvak, Outside of being a filter and stick behavior focused developer, he's also actually honed in on that D-pad. So if
Well,
I'll send you another photo of something that's in development. It's a way to make the D-pad more consistent, and by doing so, is that it's attaching SMD style buttons on top of the D-pad. So let me just save this.
and that already helps because it feels like whenever you press any part of the D-pad, really you're pressing down the whole thing, and that's why you
Yeah,
consistently can't get the right thing.
yeah. So Carvac is very, very big on actually adding physical buttons on top of the D-pad, on top of the D-pad contacts in order to make inputs more consistent and less flaky. Because the issue with the GameCube D-pad is that there's like a central pivot and you're just rolling around. So how do you prevent it from rolling to two contacts at the same time? You add buttons. And that's something that he's been working on, and that's something that he's made a point to try on every single board revision and try to modify the contacts to make it easier to do so. That there is a way to make the D-pad easier, make the D-pad better.
That's beautiful. There.
Another example has been Phobos, who has been working on optical triggers. So the analog sliders in the GameCube controller are still potentiometers.
Oh, of course they are.
They're linear potentiometers. They're not rotational. They're linear, but they're still potentiometers, and they still degrade. So if you've ever had issues where if you let go of your trigger, you still get a little bit of light shield right before it cuts out, that's because you have issues with the slider.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So Phobos has been focused on trying to find a contactless version of the analog trigger, and his first attempt has been optical sensors, which is basically you're just flashing a light source and you have a reflective board, and then you try to detect where the
Oh, that is a
trigger
controller.
is.
Don't throw your
What?
GameCube controllers. You're gonna ruin the optical sensor. Holy cow. This is insane. Light source mirroring, this, that. The technology, Frost.
Yes, we like the end goal. The end goal of the Phob is to make a consistent controller that doesn't need like GameCube sourced parts.
Yeah, it doesn't need Nintendo. I heard
Because
that. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I mean, if you really want to be blunt about it, that doesn't need Nintendo. Because Nintendo aren't going to make GCCs forever.
No,
We will
stop.
not have them. We will not have them forever. So we are going to need something to replace it with. And the Phob board, the Phob C-Stick, the Phob LR digital pads, and Phob sliders are a big jump in that direction. A big jump to getting a controller that the community itself can design. And there's still one major stumbling block that hasn't been resolved yet, and that is something that we have actually been super hoping Panda can solve for us. The stick box.
Stick box.
The stick box is the actual white thing here you see that you actually move.
Oh, okay.
Believe it or not, these things are actually incredibly well designed. It's just that Melee players are horrifically abusive to their controllers.
Oh, yes. Legendary.
Yes. But these things are actually incredibly well designed. The tolerances are particularly tight. If you were trying to manufacture this on your own, it would cost tens of thousands of dollars for molds alone to injection mold engineer it, or injection mold manufacture it.
Oh, yeah. And like, with tens of thousands of dollars is not nothing to sneeze at.
It's not. I mean, so when we saw that Panda was actually reverse engineering the JP White stick boxes, that's something that could also very well contribute, because if Panda can supply the community with stick boxes, then we really don't need any more parts from the GameCube controller itself. Because if you've been around the Cranes Discord and the custom GCC Discord, you already know that people can cast buttons.
Right.
People can cast shells.
Mm-hmm.
People can make replacement detachable cables. We now have the board. We now don't need potentiometers anywhere.
Circle in on the final, the final grail, the holy grail, if you will.
The holy grail is the stick box. The holy grail is this stick box. Because if you can get something that feels good and fits the profile, that would be absolutely huge. People in the community have spent months trying to source this directly from the original manufacturer, because Nintendo doesn't make this themselves.
Oh, of course, yeah, they rely on companies to do that kind of stuff. Yep.
Yeah, and that's actually what Cardano has done. So Cardano actually contacted the original manufacturers and managed to quietly source analog trigger sliders, so you can actually buy brand new ones directly from Cardano.
Oh, interesting. And also deodorant, right?
Yep.
That's crazy. Sorry.
I want to try that. I want to try the deodorant. I've heard very good things about it. I've heard incredible things about it. I want to try the deodorant.
And so, if this is the last thing that is hard and or impossible to do, the stick box, when that happens, it's almost as if it'll sort of be just it'll lead down the line, years down the line, if I had to guess, to where you say, this is the controller that the community has legitimately built on its own. We now have all the sources we need to get every single part that you see in this thing. And here it is. You can buy it for however much money. I don't care. You can make it as expensive as or as cheap as you want. That doesn't matter to me. But the point is that it's accessible and you can get it soon, as compared to right now, which is you wait for a box for a long time or build one yourself. You do the controller lottery, or you commission someone to do, and it doesn't matter if it's a Goon Wave or this, that, and the third. You still have to wait. It's expensive. All this stuff. But another thing that was really appealing for Panda was, oh, I just go here and I press click, and then I'll get it allegedly at this time. Even if it was a Kickstarter, I was like saying, okay, I'm just waiting for December of 2022. I'm ready. I'm ready for it. Didn't work out, but that's what I'm really excited about. That in the future, when you tell somebody who's never heard of Melee before, this is what you want to watch, and when you get into it and you love the game that's like nearly 50 years old or however long this is down the line, now I can tell you where to get the controller for the game that you want to have, and it's not insanely hard to find. A controller that works
and is consistent.
Consistent.
This is the big thing that draws people to projects like the Phob and Goon Wave, because GameCube controllers are inherently inconsistent, and boxes are consistent. That doesn't make boxes broken. It's an advantage of the box. In fact, here is my one hot take of the episode.
Okay.
A perfectly hand-picked Goldilocks GameCube controller is better than a box.
I want to hear this. Yes.
A perfectly hand-picked GameCube controller with no POD on the Y-axis and slight POD on the X-axis can and will be better than any digital rectangle for a wide number of reasons. Because number one, it will pivot very, very, very well. I've seen a Goldilocks controller that pivots better than the Phob does now. Number two, you have a wide selection of wave dash angles that are not absolutely restricted. Number three, you got those pivot tilts that are actually locked out of the box. And lastly, but not least, is you have single input ledge dashes, which are when you move down and you get the fast fall, and then you can air dodge in that same angle in one analog stick motion.
Oh my gosh. What?
Yeah,
same input?
So I have a controller right here. So if you just try to do a ledge dash, most people push down and in, or C-stick down and in, or back and down and in to wave dash, right? So on the Goldilocks controllers, you can actually push just straight down and in, and your character will drop ledge, and then you can just hit jump and air dodge with the same analog input, and you'll get a ledge dash.
Ooh, that's nice.
That behavior is really, really nice, really, really smooth, really, really desirable. If you ever ask about a good ledge dashing controller, that's what that is.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
And
That's
and
just,
a Goldilocks controller can do that.
and that's why you've said a lot of really intelligent things, so obviously I'm inclined to believe you just right off the bat. But yeah, there are certain things about the box that, for me as a novice player, I've only played on this thing a few times. I'm like, why is there no up button on the left side? This is so weird. I get it. Cool. It's on my right pinky finger. That's great. Why is there no up button on the left side of this stupid thing? So like that's my current gripe with the box that I'll get over at some point. But like, you know what I mean? Like there are probably more complicated reasons, like being locked out of being able to do pivot tilts. And then there are other things I'm sure that the box are just like ultimately the control that an analog stick can give you like greater access to, because angles, and you don't really think about when you're drifting in the air about how you're either drifting at full speed or at walk speed or slow walk speed. But for some of the things that you want to do in Melee, where there's like, you know, super little cool niche things like drifting back at the absolute last second, this, that, and the third, or Captain Falcons who are learning how to double jump and correctly double jump at the right time and drift at the right time to, you can't get hit by a lot of attacks if you do it correctly, where you're sort of like, you're almost too low, but you still grab the ledge. If you do that perfectly, then you're a Captain Falcon player to be reckoned with, because you can't just get down smashed by something or down tilted by something cheap. Like the person actually has to develop more counter strategies. It's all kinds of stuff like that.
Yeah. But the thing is that Goldilocks controller will only last at most a month.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the issue. So to me, I've slowly over time developed the opinion that GameCube controller is just pure sheer. The best GameCube controller is better than a box. But then you have that issue where the box is better than the GameCube controller everywhere else. And this is where you start to get to balance issues. This is where you start to get to rules. And this is something that the Phob team has been actively working on. So me, Karvak, and Phobos have been in discussion with the big, what you call like the big five rule makers on what's legal, on what's good, what's bad, what's legal, what's not legal. Because ultimately,
the big five.
you can't have a GameCube controller that is just busted and gives you everything for free. You know, we can't make the game easier exclusively. Things have to be within reason. Things have to be balanced, and things have to have drawbacks.
Okay.
So this is where like a lot of the discussion has taken place, and a lot of the of back and forth has gone on. So we've just sat down with them and multiple times talked about our features. We've explained that. We've shown code. We've shown exactly how it behaves in comparison to other things. And this is something that is really, really important, because should we preserve that Goldilocks GameCube controller on the Phob? Because the Phob doesn't wear out. So when a controller doesn't wear out, do you want to preserve that 1 in a billion controller lottery controller? And is it fair to do so?
There are so many reasons. Okay, let me just give you one good reason. If you make it so that everyone who wants it can get it, what's the problem with having a controller that does everything well? Oh my gosh. Yes, we're going to have to code in POD to a Halifax sensor magnetic Phob controller. Are you kidding me? No.
We've done it.
I am not in favor of this as a podcaster who very few people listen to. I'm not down with that. Oh my god.
That's the issue, because
you program poding into a box controller. What's the problem? That's unbelievable.
It's just, you know, if someone wants to play with a box, we have to make sure that the GCC isn't exclusively better.
Okay.
There has to be balance. To me, that's what I think. I know that's not an opinion that others share, but to me, having that balance is important. You have to make sure that no matter what someone is playing on, it's fair and reasonable. Mm-hmm. A Guitar Hero controller is not fair and reasonable and does need to be balanced against. But a box, something that is actually in the hands of thousands of players, and something that has been in their hands for 5 years now, That's something that needs to be taken into consideration on how it's balanced. And this is something where I'm very, very grateful to the Big Five and the rule set team who have taken their time to sit down with us and talk behavior and talk what's good and what's bad.
But as of right now, you said it earlier, if the box controller, the rectangle style fellas, have an inherent advantage over 98 or 99% of all GCC controllers right now as it stands, if you balance that where you could say nearly every single GCC user eventually gets their Goldilocks controller, even still, that process would take such a long time. I guess I don't understand the concept of, well, right now as it stands, things are even, but that's not true. Things are not even right now. As soon as someone who's using a box style controller starts winning tournaments, that's probably when a lot of things will change. But as it stands right now, most people agree the standard GCC controller does not and will not keep up with a box style controller. No. And so we want to preserve that, because that's sort of what I'm hearing, but am I hearing that wrong? Because that's kind of what I'm gathering from the whole idea of how do we limit the Phob controller?
The thing is that we can't really nerf the box any more than we really have now without fundamentally breaking how it works. Like I've actually had a chance to talk to a lot of box players, including Carvac, one of the main developers of the Phob, plays on box.
Oh, that's interesting.
And there's a lot that breaks if you try to nerf the box. So rather than try to nerf the box, why don't you buff the GCC?
Yes. See, and that's what I'm on board with. Yes.
And this is where the Phob starts to come in.
Yes.
So the goal of the Phob is to provide you with a consistent controller that never wears out.
Right.
And that's already a huge buff in its own, because that means that you can play on this controller for 2 years and the behavior ideally should stay the same. We haven't actually had a Phob that's 2 years old to show for that.
Right.
I actually have one of the oldest here, the 1.0. That's 6 months old now.
Right.
And it still behaves perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
That's already a huge buff in its own. Because imagine a controller that you want to replace. And now let's talk about how we can buff it further. So Melee is inherently an imperfect game. There's polling shenanigans. To explain that, it's simply because the game pulls the controller twice per frame, but it's only showing like the visual once per frame.
Yeah.
So you run into polling issues where if your analog stick is pulled in a bad zone, then you might just get screwed over.
Right, and you don't even realize it.
Yeah. So this is where we wrap around back to the signal filtering. The Phob already, pivots incredibly well given you build it right. And that's something that a lot of players are looking after. Very, very clean, very, very consistent pivots. On the tools that we have to analyze pivot behavior, I've gotten 95% consistency. The question then starts to become is, do we add layers to this? So it already pivots cleanly, it already dashes back cleanly, and one of the features that I've been massively discussing about is those down plus in ledge dashes. Do we want that as a permanent buff?
Oh, so you're basically just saying, where do we draw the line? How far do we go with buffing? Because I was like, why are we not buffing the GCC through the Phob to be close to?
It's already buffed. It's already the Phob is already a massive GCC buff, simply because it's a controller that never wears out and something that you're used to.
Right.
And we've gone further by giving it somewhat idealized behavior, giving it idealized stick pivot behavior, idealized dashback behavior. Where do we start to draw that line of enough is enough? And unfortunately, it's sort of a balancing game at this point, because the Phob is open source. Anyone who is anyone can take the firmware we've written and build on it and write their own version. So ideally, we're kind of in the zone where it's, where do we draw the line of someone going out of their way and potentially building something that could be more controversial?
Right, it's their Phob, but they've done some rather interesting things.
Yeah, and
macros. Oh no! that kind of
And
stuff.
this enters one last point, because I see that we're running close to time. But this enters one last point that I do want to bring up that a lot of people have expressed concerns about. The Phob is open source. Anyone can edit the source code. What about legality? Isn't this a massive Pandora's box? And
You already know what a Pandora's box looks like in the Melee community. It's called the box controller.
Yep.
Uh,
And ultimately, the reply I have to that is Pandora's box is already open. TOs don't exactly do controller checks at every single event.
not.
If someone wants to sneak in, actually very recently, we've had a visible post on the SSBM subreddit where someone was using a Dween controller for years.
Years.
The reality of the situation is that Pandora's box is already open and people are already doing whatever they want with their controllers, and there's already limited oversight. The goal of the Phob is to sort of take that and try to centralize it at least a little bit. If everyone's running the same Phob firmware, then you have a good idea of what everyone's running, and you have a good idea of whether or not it's legal. Do you see where I'm going with that?
To basically saying it's open source, but also kind of like
it's good enough that no one's going to bother making their own.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Even despite the fact that you can sort of copy paste and then start tweaking it, it's just sort of like, well, why would I do that? It's already done.
Why would you do that? Yeah. We already the firmware team in the community has already gone out of its way to do the job for you. Why build on that?
Gotcha. Well,
and even if you are interested in doing that, why not just contribute to the project directly?
Oh, especially because everybody's super open and inviting, the Discord be popping off, all that fun stuff.
Oh yeah, like just today, like people have been in the VC talking, discussing how to source this, what to change. There is a lot of movement in controllers right now, and we're entering the era that I like to call the era of monster controllers. People are talking about mouse click face buttons, mouse click triggers, mouse click Z, tactile this, slickbox that. We're in an era where things are pretty out there as far as what you can get in a controller. And I think like a project like the Phob can help to like combine all that into one package. Because we already have support for the face buttons. The mouse click Z, if it needs a different footprint, you can just edit the PCB layout. You can just edit the board layout. And for the triggers, we can make our own pads.
Got to do is master the stick box, find a way to make that sourceable.
Yeah.
And then it's just a matter of the right people coming along and saying, "Yeah, I'm kind of a whale. I'm gonna try to make some of these appear and then be obtained by the community." That would be super cool.
Yeah.
I'm in agreement with you with how the Pandora's box is already open. I like the idea of us continuing to push this until it arrives to a spot where it's more universalized, that idea that you're talking about earlier. Because right now, yes, it is a little bit of the wild west, but we're all going to look back on this era fondly and remember when we were just not sure exactly where it was all going. Those are fun times, because I do feel like all you got to do is just stick with it, and then since Melee has this, the community just composes itself in such a way that you can't get away with murder. The person who wrote that subreddit admitted that they didn't necessarily try to go to super majors and take over brackets with that Arduino. So I would just say that as long as somebody looked at JMook's controller ever since he popped off at Genesis 8 and it was not an Arduino controller, I think we're good. Good.
And the idea of the Phob is to sort of give you a central hub so that any feature you want, it's already in the firmware. We've taken in ideas and we've taken in everything from the community.
Yep, there are no stones unturned. That's super cool.
There are no stones unturned. On triggers too, we have so many different trigger modes. So in the current firmware, you only have 3, but there's already another 2 in development. So right now you can have the normal behavior. You can have it set so that it's digital only, so you only get that bottom out.
Right.
You have the analog only, which means there's no digital at the bottom, which is actually very, very good for soft L canceling, so you can still tech while L canceling.
Oh,
A
that's
box only feature.
right. That's what they say about doing Z canceling, because that's sort of
Yeah.
the same deal, right?
But being able to just soft L cancel while still being able to do LRAS. Because if you do that mod on an OEM controller, you lose the ability to do LRA start.
Of course you do. Oh, I love Melee.
It's true. No, because if you fundamentally change the controller, you make it so you can't enter a digital R input, you can't quit out of the game.
Right? You got to
So
actually play your 99 stock game.
Yeah, it preserves that. And then, we have questions about Yoshi triggers, or being able to select light shield values for the digital input. People have making suggestions, and the team and the community have just been adding and adding and adding and adding. And I think we'll see this project grow and blossom into something, really, really beautiful. Something that the community can be proud of, that people from all walks of life have contributed.
And I'm really glad to hear that it captured somebody like you, one of the Generation Z people who we all look at and go, are they going to stick around with Melee? And it's fun to hear how you're definitely too deep in the sauce to get out anytime soon. And
too deep.
And for all the work that's being done, how it is much more of a community-led project at this point than it is specifically burdening on 1 or 2 people, because I feel bad for Fizzy. Slippy is more or less helmed by himself. Now he has help. I have to assume that to be the case, but it's still mostly Fizzy as far as I know. Yeah. So that's
a lot to shoulder for Fizzy.
Yes. And so if the controller answer, or the controller, not ultimate, what's the word that I want here? If the controller end game is the Phob controller, it'll get there, because it's not just 1 or 2 people working on it behind the scenes. It's something that we can all see and participate in if we want to. My version of participating is being like, when can I buy one? Because I have never been brave enough to take apart my controllers before, but maybe I will at some point in the near future.
You're not the only one. I've walked some people through teardowns.
We'll get there at some point, and maybe next time for if I ever get a Phob, maybe we can get you back on, or somebody else, maybe Hoborg, somebody to help me tear it apart and show me all the little cool things that are going on down the line. Yeah. But in the meantime, I do want to get to a few Patreon questions before we get you going here, Frost. These are all from Oates, and I also goes by Marco or Marco, the what's the word that I want here? Editor-in-chief of the Major Zine, which is super cool. So we talked about where the idea of the Phob controller come from, where the biggest obstacles encountered while trying to navigate the GCC motherboard. We talked about some of that stuff. Who are your community inspirations, Frost?
Community inspirations. Within what scope? I'm gonna ask. Like when
you're gonna have to say Phobos, otherwise that's just like, what was the whole point of talking about joining in this project if it wasn't for Phobos being so cool about it?
If it wasn't for Phobos being so open and willing to just like share what he has and what he has done, the project would have never gotten off the ground. I reached out to him like early January, like 2 hours after he posted a Reddit. I searched all across Discord and I found him and I DM'd him, and he was super willing and super open. He shared it with me. He helped me order all the parts. He walked me through some troubleshooting, because if you look on the back of this 1.0, there is a wire under the rumble bracket, and that's because of a little technical flaw that I made in assembly. He helped me through that, and he helped me debug it and finally get this board fully working. He's been really, really chill and really, really awesome about it.
Yeah. In the terms of a community inspiration, so somebody from the Melee community.
Mm-hmm. So someone from the Melee community that like really, really inspired me has to be PPMD. I know that's kind of a cliche question, but PPMD actually was super, super interested in the Phob GCC early on, and he actually acquired one from the Phob team to play on. and I've had interactions with him, and it's been so incredibly wholesome, so incredibly awesome, and just energetic, and he's exactly as I'd imagined from watching Apex 2015 and watching all of the other videos he ended up producing. It was super exciting to actually get to meet someone I looked up to.
Get this person on Radio Melee. I'm just saying. Just saying. You could do that,
Like,
you know. Someday. Let's cross our fingers. You have the experience now. You already know how to throw out hot takes. That's super cool. Is there a passion project that you're a fan of that you think more people should pay attention to, Frost?
Is there yes, in fact, there is a passion project that I do think more people need to pay attention to, and that has to be the Melee Decompilation Project. So it's something that I recently got into, but there's actually a group of people who are trying to effectively, decompile Melee's source code, and I think that needs every single ounce of attention that it can get, because this will advance our understanding of the game 100-fold. Because having access to its direct source code means we can look at exact behavior, we can look at physics, we can look at interactions at a level that we never have been before. Right now, we can look at hitboxes, we can look at ECBs, we can look at everything from an outside perspective. But having access to the exact code will allow us to double check and be 100% certain in everything we say and everything we double check about the game. That's gigantic shout out to them. And if you're familiar with the Super Mario 64 decompilation project, the amount of mods that resulted from that and the amount of extra benefits and features that result from that are insane. This is something that we could potentially see that Melee being recompiled to run on your computer directly without an emulator.
Among other things. I mean, I think about like dashback. We don't have to worry about dashback. Poor priority. We don't really need to worry about poor priority.
We could fix it. We could fix that.
Theoretically. Yeah. It's all possible when you have the source code. And I heard about that a little while ago, and I was like, this is probably going to be one of those behind the scenes things for a while until they make more progress. I think I'm part of that Discord though. I just forget what the icon
GC
looks
like. Decompilation. It's the GameCube logo. It's the cube.
Yes, yep, there I am. Oh, look at this. Look at all these channels. I don't think these were all here when I was last poking around. Okay, let's go.
These guys are absolutely incredible, and these guys need more attention for the work they're doing, because the moment we have access to Melee's source code is the moment things change forever.
So here's hoping that also happens sometime in the future, especially before 2051 or something. And let's see, I got a few more here, and then we can get you going. What are your predictions for the next? Oh, we actually did talk about the next hardware jump upgrades, that kind of thing. And then, what does this mean? Custom Melee-specific consoles similar to the Analog Pocket? I don't know what an Analog Pocket is.
I know what that is. So, the idea behind the analog devices is that you basically take what's called an FPGA, or a field programmable gate array. You can think of it as a microcontroller that you can rewire on the fly to fit different pieces of hardware. What this question is about is, would we ever see something like that for the Nintendo Wii that could potentially run Melee, so that we could even replace the Wii itself?
Oh.
This is replacing the actual console.
Gosh. If you can run it on the computer, theoretically, because Melee, we got Melee source code at some point.
Melee source code, or through Dolphin, we can already do a decent job of that. But what they're asking about is not an emulation or not a recompilation, but actually being able to put a disc in a non-Nintendo console and have it just boot straight to Melee.
I mean, that'd be kind of cool.
That would be kind of cool, but I have a couple of doubts in that, because because the massive jumps in complexity. We've seen Analog NT tackle NES, SNES, the Game Boy, the Sega Genesis, the Game Boy Advance, and similar consoles. I'm not 100% sure if they've done the 64 yet.
But obviously, the newer you get, the more information, the more code, the more everything.
The more complexity. Yes. The more complexity and the more cost. Because right now I think the I know like the analog Super Nintendo launched for like $400.
Well, yeah.
And its ultimate competition, at least for Melee, would be Wii's, which Nintendo made over 100 million of those things, and they're super super easy and super super cheap to find. I mean, if you go on eBay, you'd look for a Wii that has a broken disk drive, you can buy it, and then you just soft mod it and you run Melee.
Yep, for like $20.
Yep. Until we see more Wii's start to die out and it start to become a bigger problem, I don't think we're going to tackle that yet. Because as long as the Wii's we have survive, I don't think we'll see anything similar to the Analog Pocket or the Analog NT.
But that is cool to see that, or to hear about someone who's saying, let's just make more of these. We don't need to wait for somebody to release a classic version and then only make like 20 of them because they want exclusivity, or releasing a game for 12 months and then pulling it back away when it's just basically like copy and pasted emulation that doesn't do any sort of modernization. But meanwhile, in the Melee community, where it's not the newest Smash game, but see, it's crazy because like there is literally a big group of people who are striving to make the perfect controller, and it's going to be awesome. And it's taken years and years of playing around with different things and advancing the meta, and now we're at this spot. So you should really check out, I recommend the Smash documentary if you want to watch maybe perhaps the emblem. But oh my gosh, the elevator pitch continues to evolve as well. I got nothing left for you for tonight, Frost. We have gone over our time, and I really appreciate you being willing to stick around. I hope that I didn't take up too much. To finish though, please tell the people where they can find you and find the project for the Phob controller, or if you also want to make sure that the source code group, oh man, I forgot the name of the project, dang it, the Wii decompilation project, the GameCube decompilation project.
So you can find me at my Twitter, FrostSSBM.
Mm-hmm.
You can find the project on GitHub, which is just if you just go on GitHub and look up the Phob GCC, you'll see the organization for it, which contains the repositories for the hardware, the software, and the tool. From there, you can get links directly to the Discord. Or if you want to go the YouTube route, I made the trailer for the Phob GCC. At the bottom there are links to the GitHub and the Discord community to reach out to the GCC Wii decompilation project. My best point would be to Reddit, because right now that's what I did. There's no really good public way to find it outside of Reddit.
Yeah, a few links from you for the people for the clicking on the description of the podcast or the video would be super, super cool. The Discord invite link into the server for the Phob GCC, is that a permanent invite, or is that like a limited time invite link?
That is a permanent invite.
Okay, very good. Well, that'll get you in the right direction. I can get that and your Twitter and maybe a video to the trailer in case all these lovely visuals have not been enough for you already. I'm super excited to see where this project goes. Frost, it's so cool that within a matter of about, it sounds like within a year, you've gone from, kind of messing around doing the normal, I like Melee stuff, to just like, I am now evolved. I'm like level 100 over here. I'm speaking as you, Frosty. I am just casually changing how Melee is going to be played for the next 50 years. So let's go. I'm excited to see where this goes. And Frost, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being on Bottom of the Smash Mountain with me.
All right. It was nice being on here. And yeah, I really want to see where things go for Melee in general. Where will the meta be in 10 years?